Hey everyone, and welcome to this build diary update of the Ignite Flameblast Elementalist. We'll start off with a quick map showcase of the Jungle Valley map. This league is especially difficult with the buffed rare and magic monsters, but let's just show you some of it. So you can clear small packs by just tapping Flameblast like that, so that's very useful. You don't always have to channel it to be giant like that. So, other than Flame Blast, we have a bunch of skills that I'm trying out to see which ones work the best together. I have a Warcry, just for some extra regen and some endurance charges. I have Wave of Conviction, which also applies Flammability Curse on it. Then I have the amazing, let's get a big pack, the amazing Vaal Flameblast. Feels super satisfying to use. And I have an extra damage buff button, Divine Blessing Malevolence, so I see my HP drop there, and that's a little bit more damage. And I also have a Warcry that covers enemies in Ash, which slows them slightly and makes them take more damage. And then I have Shield Charge, Vaal Molten Shell, and yeah, the rest is pretty basic. So it's a very fun build to do. It's very cool playstyle, I find anyway, just blowing up massive screens. Let's try and get a big sentinel screen here, just a showcase. So let's just do that with the big sentinel screen. Feels very good. And with the Ignite Prolove, not a lot of work that you need to do. Alright, cool, let's check the boss damage. This is a very long... This boss takes long to spawn, so bear with me. The one downside in terms of mob types that I have found so far is if you get the what is it, flame weaver? What's that mob type called? The one that's very basically immune to fire damage. That one takes a long time to kill. And then other than that, the rest of these are pretty straightforward. Right, so that's where I'm at so far. So in terms of gear, I have literally bare basic gear. This is a wand I got from a vendor when I started playing. Pretty lucky to get this. Its only stat on it is pretty much +1 to fire gems. The +5 fire damage is basically nothing, and then I just got some cast speed on it. I found cast speed to be very good quality of life on this build. It means you have to stand still for shorter periods of time. Just basic, pretty bad helmet I got. Same with my shield. All I'm looking for so far is to cap my resistances, have life, mana, and possibly energy shield if I can on all my gear. So I'm just going through all the pieces here. There's nothing special, as you can see. This is the glove base you want to use, I think, the increased damage over time one. And then I like these boots for some chaos rays. And then I like the Stygian as well because it's very good defensively. In terms of Chaos Rays, I'm almost capped. I'm heading towards being capped soon. You can see I also have a lot of block and spell block. This is because you stand still for so long. Also have a lot of physical damage reduction. My character's name is Pepe Melt. It's kind of a play on the Ignite and the Twitch meme Pepe Meltdown because it was for League Start. So went with that. My rest of my gem links I have other than Flame Blast, which by the way, if you get Vaal Flameblast, highly recommend that, very fun to use. It's burning damage support. I got Cruelty. So the way Cruelty works, Flame Blast have to hit for enough damage for you to get a valid Cruelty buff. So a good one is like, I think anywhere between, let's say 35 to 40% on all mobs. So you can use Deadly Ailments as well, but it will reduce your hit damage, so you'll have to check if you're still getting 40% Cruelty buff. I have Ignite Prolove. This is kind of optional, it's just because it's fun to clear with. Immolate I'm also using because basically this chest is corrupted and I couldn't get more than 2 red sockets. I'm playing Solar Southbound, so I'm kind of limited on gear and stuff. Anyway, it also adds flat fire damage against burning enemies, which is great for bosses. It's more basically more fire damage over time, and then also it helps you with proccing cruelty even on a little bit tankier mobs. And then the last link is purely based on my preference. It's faster casting. There's a lot of other links you can use. So here in my offhand I have Unbound Ailments. I used to use this one. It's probably better than faster casting. Like I said, I just like the quality of life of being able to cast it quickly. And then Infused Channeling I've tried out, but I found that I rarely channel it for long enough to actually proc. But it's a very good defensive layer and good damage as well if you want to go that route. And then as I said, Deadly Ailment's probably the best damage for damage over time skills you can use. You can try and swap that one in, or you can do Inspiration, which is what I'm thinking of doing. Fire skills or with damage over time, Ignite skills, you always want to go for Elemental Overload. So as you can see, I have 5% crit strike chance on this skill itself. I've actually opted out of Elemental Overload because I rarely crit, maybe like once per map if I'm lucky, with my Flameblast. So I thought it would be best to rather spec out of it for now, but that's a very big damage boost if you can make crit work. So just a note, they changed how Elemental Overload work. It used to be if you proc it with any skill crit, it used to give you the buff. Now you'll see on your icons itself, it will have a little diamond shape thing that will show that Elemental Overload is active on this particular skill. Now then that works only for that skill. So it's unfortunate the way they changed that for our build. This is my tree at the moment. I am planning on changing it up slightly. This part I'm fairly happy with. If you level up more, you can go and grab Growth Decay over here. If you need more life, you can eat life in ES over here with these nodes. This is very necessary. The preservation abilities on the tree, it allows you to have all of these auras that I have currently. Now on the auras, I am going to change mine up slightly. I have Purity of Elements at the moment to give me ailment immunity, but I've since realized that I didn't really see this, but they changed Tempest Shield, so it also gives you shock immunity, which is great, because that means all we still need to solve is freeze immunity and ignite immunity. So for freeze immunity, I'm going to swap over to using Arctic Armor probably. It's not necessary that it's the best way to go forward. I'll let you know in the next update whether it's good or not, or is something else that's better. As you know, when you channel Flameblast, you're stationary, and the change they added to Arctic Armor is it only works now when you are stationary. It provides us more fire resistance or less fire damage taken, which will help us because we don't have Ignite immunity at the moment, and then this buff will give us freeze immunity. Purity of Elements has 50% reservation, so this gives us 25, and we have 25 extra left that we can still reserve. So the other one that I'm thinking of using is Glacian Stone. Then this brings us to 50%. But anyway, so I want to replace Purity of Elements with these two. This will give us another form of less damage taken, and Blind, which will give us basically 50% evasion. You could also go for Grace, which will give you possibly more evasion than the Blind from these Sandstorms will give you. And it's up to you whether you prefer that. It has a higher dexterity requirement than Arctic Armor will have, so I'm thinking Arctic Armor will be better to make work with this build, especially on Solo Self-Found. In terms of flasks, I'm just going for purely defensive flasks at the moment. With the Tempest Shield and some block nodes on the tree, basically those and these, I'm spell block capped, a little bit over capped actually, so that's pretty easy to achieve. And then with Glancing Blows, you always take a little bit of damage from hits even though you block. So I'm speccing into Divine Shield and trying to get my physical damage reduction as high as possible, because that would mean you recover 3% of physical damage prevented as Energy Shield. So you just want a little bit of Energy Shield. I think 800 is already enough for the purposes of making this a very useful defensive layer. I'll use this spider. So you see it hits me, but my Energy Shield keeps going up. And that's basically the power of it, is it gives you that little bit of an extra regen defensive layer on top of everything else. Anyway, so the rest of the things that I'm still trying to solve is I want to go for a ring that gives you recoup. So basically damage recouped as life. That would be very helpful for this build to just sustain a little bit better. I did go for some life regen nodes on the tree, but I still feel like I need a lot more to be sufficient, have sufficient regeneration. In terms of ascendancies, I went for, this is the most important one, Shaper of Flames. It makes it so you have 100% ignite chance for Flameblast. So by default, its ignite chance is 50%. So you need to get that other 50% either off the tree or taking this is probably the best idea because it also gives you more damage. It also gives you the all damage can ignite, which makes it so that the Temper Shield ignites as well. So then the next thing I just wanted to cover, because I thought it was a little bit unclear, is exposures you inflict apply an extra minus 20% to the resistance. And then also regenerate 1% of mana per second if you inflict exposure recently. That's just an added benefit for this build, which is very mana hungry. But let me explain the exposure. So I'm using Wave of Conviction. So it says applies 15% elemental resistance exposure matching the highest damage type. Make it so that fire damage, even if you go to the maximum lightning and the minimum fire roll, would be the best. So that's stuff that's shown over here. So fire damage will always be the highest damage type. So that then it will apply 15% elemental resistance exposure to fire damage by default. Now that's how you get fire exposure, or how I get fire exposure on the enemy. Now on top of that you get an extra minus 25 from your Ascendancy, which puts you at minus 40, and then from the mastery, the fire mastery, you have an extra 5%, so you have minus 45% fire raise by using Wave of Conviction on enemy. Very useful for one little button. And then I have linked it to flammability. Let's start there. Wave of Conviction, I've linked to Hex Touch and flammability. The reason for that is then you curse them so they take an extra 44% minus raise, which is great. And then it's also just one button that hits instead of having to cast flammability additionally. And then I have a combustion on here, which says enemies ignited by supported skill have minus 10 fire resistance. So basically you hit a boss, well, you should try and hit the boss first with Wave of Conviction to apply that minus 10%, and then hit it with your Fire Blast. Because Fire Blast will do more damage, it will be the ignite that sticks on the enemy. So the way ignites works is if you only, well, by default you can only have one ignite on an enemy, and the highest damage ignite will always stay on that enemy. Going back to my Ascendancy, the next one I'm taking is the Heart of Destruction. This gives you a very useful giant AoE without having any other investment on the tree in area of effect. And then it also gives you that convergence for 4 seconds, which gives you more damage. And then you can either go for Bastion of Elements with your Uber Lab. I'm probably going to do Uber Lab today. Or you can do Shaper of Storms, which makes it so that you basically shock enemies and make them take more damage. You might need some cluster jewels to get some very good damage out of it. So there's 2 places you can get cluster jewels of my current tree. You can get it over here or over here. It's not too far to travel away. And then with cluster jewels you'll be able to get a huge amount of damage boost. And in terms of your normal jewels, this is not the ideal one, but a pretty good one. So you would like fire damage over time multiplier, increase maximum life, and then this is just a generic increase damage over time multiplier. And then the one that is very strong and noticeable I felt is that damaging elements deal damage 5% faster. They're just good examples of some basic starter jewels that you'll be able to get pretty easily. Just a note that a lot of people fall for in terms of Ignite builds. Ignite builds does not scale with spell damage. You get a slight bit of damage upgrade because a spell increases your hit damage that your ability does a little bit, but the majority of the damage you get will be either from elemental damage, or it will be from fire damage over time multiplier, damage over time, or increased fire damage. In terms of where this build is going forward, I'll make another update video in the future, but I really hope you guys like Flameblast as much as I do. It's a bit of an off-meta ability, and I like to do off-meta things. So if you like off-meta builds like I do, consider to subscribe and like this video to support the channel, and I'll give you some updates and more future builds coming up. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.